Automation. I like automation. Who doesn't? So the reason I like automation is obviously now I have my presentation as well. Does it work down? No. No. Okay. Sorry. So the reason there it is, specialized in nothing except getting stuff done. But I'm really super easily bored, and I hate doing the same thing twice. I'm one of these guys who I automate my timesheets. I have a script that pulls it from the time report on the internet and creates an Excel sheet so I can just mail it. I haven't yet connected it to my Google account so that it actually sends it every Monday. I really should do that. But it's our early days of the contract. I've only been there for 2 weeks, so give it another week and I'll automate that as well. And I think this is a really good reason for automation as well. I'm easily bored, so I don't normally take long contracts. So I build stuff and then I go away, which means that someone else has to pick up the pieces when I'm gone. And as long as whatever I did is automated and reasonably well documented, that's not a problem. If all I have is the knowledge in my head and 15 manual steps, then everything falls apart. So I really do believe that automation is super important. And I'm just going to do which screen is it? Yeah. So PYCON Sweden is a super. Was anyone here at PYCON Sweden? One. Yeah. So you should really, if you have the slightest interest in Python, keep May 9 to 10 next year free. It's not been formalized, decided and so on, but I have it on good authority that these are the dates you want to keep free. Anyway, I'm here to talk about Bitsynchub, which is a silly small tool that does a single thing, which is synchronizes Bitbucket repositories to GitHub. And it does that automatically, and it does that for a number of projects. And the reason is, of course, that all the cool kids started having this cool Travis image on their software projects. And since I like Mercurial more than I like Git, I had all of my software projects on Bitbucket. And Travis doesn't integrate, or didn't at least. I don't know if they do today. I still think they don't. They don't integrate with Bitbucket, so I couldn't have that. And I don't want to set up a Jenkins server to do my builds or whatever. So I made a small weekend hack, and then I blogged about it, and then suddenly people were using it. So I say that a lot of projects use it, and that's from reading the logs. Because one of the things I never did was add actual metrics. That's something that's surprisingly hard to get around to, because you need stuff to view it and stuff like that. Someone should build tools for that. But I'm going to talk a bit about the tech choices I made. First, I did something that I thought was super interesting, which might have been because it was a late night hack. I decided I'm not going to use Flask or Django or anything, or Node.js, if that even existed. I'm just going to do Whiskey. I pulled the specification. If you don't know, Whiskey is the CGI of Python. It's the web server gateway interface, which defines how a well-behaved Python application talks to a web server. It basically defines that an application has an entry point that takes an environment and responds with a code and data. It's a very simple standard, and it's used by basically all of the things running Python on the web. And because I'm over-ambitious, I actually wrote a little routing engine. There's going to be lots of code here, just because I like code. So I actually wrote a routing engine full with the regex support, which takes the path you go to, and then you can have lots of handlers that I never built, because I only built this one thing on top of this platform. But it's automated. You could add lots of applications here, and it will work. And this is the full whiskey specification. You have an application and you send a response with the status and headers, and then you send the data. Super simple. So this is about, what I've shown you now is about half of the application. And yeah, there's some extra plumbing needed. I mentioned CGI before, and the library is still called CGI in Python because of historical reasons. So this is all of the plumbing that was actually needed to create the application without the framework. And then I chose some stuff off the shelf. Celery, because my first attempt timed out all the time. Syncing a full repository while waiting for HTTP requests turned out to be a not good idea. MongoDB, because it's really convenient as long as you have a firewall in place. And Unicorn is one of the whiskey servers, basically. And then I used, because I wrote these two tools, I used HTAPI, which is a Mercurial pure Python non-GPL API, and Git API, which is a fork of the same thing, to integrate with the version control. And HTAPI, which was the first one that was written out of those, was a bit more than a weekend hack. It was originally written because the Mercurial libraries are GPL, and I was sitting implementing automation at the second or third customer doing basically the same thing, and I couldn't use the open source stuff because it was all GPL. So I went home and wrote a GPL version, or non-GPL version rather. The license for this is verbatim, do what you want, don't blame me. Which has proven to be pretty popular actually. So it's also very, very simple. If you already know, and Git is a mirror of this, but with Git API is a mirror of this, but for Git. If you know the command line, you know the API. The API mirrors the command line almost exactly. It's an interesting thing if you want to automate version control. This was written to do control in CI, so your Jenkins server would integrate with your central Mercurial repository and protect your default or master branch and so on. I haven't done much of that lately, but I still use it to automate stuff on the repository. And in the end, the only thing that this repository really does, except for presenting a nice interface, is running a sub-process and actually using the command line, which is why it mirrors the command line really, really well. The reason for this is that the Mercurial project stated stable API is the command line. And before this, at least, there wasn't actually a Python API that used the command line. There's also a command server, but I find the API ugly. So this is all you need. How am I doing on time? Yeah. So the integration part turns out to be both simple and a bit complicated. The Bitbucket implementation, there is basically one choice unless you're doing polling, which I don't. And that's using the post hook. So you get posted a bunch of JSON to a URL whenever you commit to it. And that means that if you need any extra stuff, like where do I want to sync this, you basically have to tack it on the URI. So you have both post and URI data, which is somewhat ugly. And had something to do because the first framework I tried to implement this in didn't support doing both in a nice way. The Whiskey standard though, it doesn't care at all. And I need to go down. And for Git, then cloning is super simple. You get the source repository, you get the destination repository. So you clone the source and you push to the target. This is a bit more broken now because they changed how Git works, because Git is funny. So they changed the default way that pull and push works. But either way, this is a super simple synchronization. Clone the repository, pull it, and then you just wipe the repository afterwards, because otherwise you run out of disk really quickly. I found that out as well. For Mercurial, it's a bit more complicated, because Git and Mercurial doesn't map entirely. What in Git are branches are in Mercurial just bookmarks. So, but there is a very nice plugin that wasn't written by me called HGGit, which means that Mercurial can understand how Git works. So the only thing you need to do is create a bookmark for each branch you want to create in Git and push it. Until you end up with wanting the same branch names in both of your repositories, in which case this breaks. So I have an issue with that right now. Found out yesterday. It was fun. And one issue with doing this is that you don't actually have a user. Nobody needs to sign up or anything. This is just a public API which people use. So when things break, you get a stack trace in your log perhaps, but the user has no idea. So I also, after a while, after having many emails asking me what went wrong with their syncs, added an interface so people could just tack on their email address in the URI string, and then get an email with the ugly formatted exception. But the error message there is usually enough hint for them to fix their error. You can see this is old code. Does anyone here know Python? Okay, so what's wrong with this code? This is code written in Python 3. This is not a good way of doing. I could have used format at least. Yeah. Horrible. So, issues. Like I mentioned, there's no user interface, there's no registration, and there's no way from Bitbucket to find out who was actually responsible for this, unless they publish. You can use the API to find the user if they didn't hide themselves, and they might have a public email address, but no, they never do. Who here published their email on Bitbucket? No? Or GitHub? No?
Potentially.
I don't know. Yeah, so there's no way to interact with the user really, because the hook is called by the Bitbucket service. So you have no idea. And who do you call? Do you call the repository maintainer or the last guy who did a commit, who may or may not be the same guy who pushed? This wasn't more of an issue before I added that email thing, but it's still an issue. Sometimes I see a project just trying and trying and trying different ways, and they don't solve their problem. And if I could just talk to them, I could tell them what they're doing wrong, but I can't because I have no way of finding them, which is a bit sad and still an unsolved problem. And then, of course, since it doesn't do polling, because polling becomes expensive once you have enough repositories, because you need to poll both Bitbucket and GitHub. The only way to re-trigger if a sync fails is to add a new commit and push it, which means that some open source projects, they have commits that are just an artifact of my stupid API design. So that's something that doesn't make me feel very proud, actually. And again, Git is funny, but not haha funny. So in Mercurial, if you create an empty repository, then you can push any repository with that. There's no history, so anything is okay. While Git says, there's no shared history, I refuse. So 50% of the errors in the log is someone just assuming, because they're mostly Mercurial users, that Git will behave sanely. For a given value of sane, where that given value is like Mercurial does it. Yeah. Which is of course the correct way of doing it. So there is of course the thing that I could add, well, let's just force this push. But then of course in Git there's no way for the server to tell if this is good or bad. So again, I can't really do that. So there's some issues with the integration. And especially this new repository thing comes up all the time, and I really should add that to the documentation one of these days. On the other hand, lots of people use it, And what I learned was that when people use a service, even if you just posted once about it in a blog, they start having expectations like you have actual uptime, or that you don't accidentally delete the server it's running on and you don't have the code anywhere else because it was just a late night hack. The code you've seen today is actually version 2 because I had to spend another late night re-implementing the entire thing after I accidentally deleted the VM it was running on. I was supposed to delete the prototype machine, but I deleted the production machine. And then I realized I had never ever added this code to the source control because I had just written it once and never changed it after that. So that's something. When you start blogging about your products, you probably should have them in source control before then, because people start having expectations. On the other hand, yeah, and especially the first project that actually used this was a tool for version control as well. So yeah, it's extremely meta and not in a good way. On the other hand, the other one was that surprisingly many found this tool useful. The entire product is 99 rows of code, while to put that in perspective, this presentation made in org mode is 150 lines of code, or 50% bigger. It's a really, really simple automation, which is used by, last time I checked, over 50 projects, and some of them pretty big ones. Since I don't have a sign up, I don't know if they want that fact kind of publicized. So I've been kind of not naming names. But you can check Bitsynchub account on GitHub and see the activity log, and there you can see which projects actually use it. And I was actually surprised that there wasn't a service like this, because I just assumed that this would be for me and some weird people. But it turns out that people use this because it's now the Google hit when you want to do this. So even if it was just a late night hack twice, it has turned out saving time for lots of people. And most of them use this either because a GitHub mirror is something you want, because GitHub is a big name, or because, just like me, they want the Travis integration. And like I said, there's some things I really would like to do. I really would like to add metrics, because I don't know how much it's used unless I go in and pull through the supervisor logs. I would like to add polling so people don't have to dirty their repositories. And I've been asked once or twice to support private repositories and or make the product open source. I would like to clean up the code. You saw print statements in that code. I don't know if you saw that, but it doesn't have proper logging or anything. So it's a couple of hours to make 99 rows of code into 120 well-documented, nice. And to be fair, it's the reason I would make it open source is because when I go off-grid, someone can just pick it up and put it on a new host. But on the other hand, it's just about as much work provisioning a new machine as implementing it, yeah. And on the other hand, private repositories. Does anyone here run a private repository where they would use a public API to sync it? No. I've had that request a couple of times, but then when I ask it, what's your use case? They're all like, yeah, that would be a feature. So the actual integration right now is that the Bitsynchub user on GitHub has a private key which gets changed every now and then, and people just give that user access to their accounts, and it pushes. But it doesn't have any access to Bitbucket, so only public repositories are supported. Every now and then someone complains, but no one is willing to tell me what their use case is. But if you have one, feel free to talk. And if there are any questions, or if you want to see all of the 99 ugly rows of code, feel free to chat me up, because that's basically it. And I hope that the small takeaway is that you can do super small automations that actually save a lot of time for a lot of people. And the VM running this probably cost me 100 crowns a month, while running my homepage as well. So there's that. Thank you.